Hello, Radiant Leo. You didn't just stumble across this video. You were guided here by something greater, something divine that's been watching, waiting, and now finally ready to speak. And so I must ask you, have you been feeling a strange silence lately? Not the kind that's empty, but the kind that feels full of messages unspoken, full of something about to break through? This is that breakthrough. Welcome to Eternal Mindfulness, where we honor sacred timing. From June 10th to 12th, you, Leo, are entering a window of energy so precise and profound that it can only be described as a divine intervention. Your Heavenly Father is breaking the silence. This is not a coincidence. This is a calling. You've been sensing it, haven't you? The unease. The restless nights. The sense that your soul is waiting for something but you couldn't quite name it. This message is that something. And it's coming straight from a place of divine love, not to scare you, but to remind you, you're not alone, and you're not off course. You are being redirected toward your soul's true path. So take a breath, Leo. Put your hand on your heart. Listen. What you feel stirring in your chest right now, that subtle vibration, that gentle awareness, is not your imagination. It's a sacred signal. And it means the time to awaken has come. Now, if you feel this message speaking to you, don't hold it in. Declare your connection. Comment below, I acknowledge the divine timing. Let the universe hear you say yes. And let others who are guided here know they are not the only ones receiving this calling. Before we move forward, let me pause to say this: thank you. Truly. For every like, every thoughtful comment, every shared moment and subscription, you become part of something much larger. You help grow the Eternal Mindfulness family, and you allow these messages to reach the hearts that have long been waiting for them. And believe me, my dear Leo, you will want to stay with me until the very last moment of this video. Because what the universe is revealing between now and the end about you, your future, and your sacred role in this world is breathtaking. Now tell me, Leo, what brought you here today? What invisible pull guided you to this very moment? Let's explore it together. Leo, your heart has always known how to shine, but lately, something has shifted, hasn't it? There's a quiet turbulence beneath your surface, an inner restlessness, a sense that something sacred within you is ready to awaken, but you've been holding it back. The planetary dance overhead is no coincidence. The Sun, your ruling planet, now forms a tense angle with Uranus, the planet of disruption and liberation. This alignment is like an inner alarm clock buzzing, nudging, shaking you out of the roles you've been playing too long, especially those that no longer reflect your truth. It may feel like anxiety. It may feel like fatigue. But in truth, it's your soul's way of saying, I'm ready to be seen. Leo is associated with the number 1 in numerology energy of beginnings, leadership, individuality, and the courage to go first. But when this energy is unbalanced, it can show up as overexertion, doing too much, giving too much, trying too hard to maintain the image of the strong, radiant one. And the more you strive to be unbreakable for others, the more distant you become from your own softness, your own light. You might be showing up for everyone around you, holding the torch high, but inside, the flame you hold for yourself is flickering. The reverse strength card appears as a mirror. It doesn't suggest a lack of power, it reveals a disconnect from your inner source. It whispers, not that you are weak, but that you've forgotten where your real strength comes from, not from control or performance, but from presence. From stillness. From the quiet courage to say, "This is who I truly am," without shrinking or editing yourself to keep others comfortable. You see, true power doesn't roar. It doesn't always come with applause. Often, it arrives in stillness, in the willingness to sit with your truth even when it feels unfamiliar. Like the gentle flame of a candle in the dark, your light doesn't need to prove itself. It just needs to be allowed. Sometimes, what looks like hiding is really a form of self-protection, a habit formed over lifetimes, perhaps. And yet, just as the flower knows how to bloom when the season turns, your spirit knows it cannot stay concealed forever. There is a natural wisdom within all living things that tells them when to rise, when to open, when to reach toward the light. You are in such a season now, Leo, not because you're being pushed, but because life is gently showing you that it's safe to step forward. You've learned so much through your efforts to stay strong. But now it's time to soften. Not to collapse, but to rest. Not to retreat, but to return to yourself. To the original light that lives inside you, not borrowed from others, not lit for show, but the flame you were born carrying. This kind of return isn't loud. It doesn't demand anything from the world. It's the simple act of becoming honest with your own soul. So ask yourself gently, what parts of me have I been dimming to meet expectations that no longer nourish me? What truths have I delayed speaking, not out of fear, but out of habit? And what would happen if I gave myself permission to shine, not for validation, but simply because it is my nature? Take a pen and write down 3 things you've been hiding, postponing, or minimizing. Then close your eyes and imagine what your life would feel like if you allowed those parts of you to breathe, to rise, to lead. You are not here to be perfect. You are here to be whole. And wholeness begins when we stop hiding the parts of ourselves that carry the most light. When we talk about divine timing, it's easy to imagine something distant or mystical, but the truth is, it often arrives in the quiet folds of daily life. Between June 10th and 12th, Leo, you are standing at the edge of one of those subtle yet life-shifting thresholds. And if you've been feeling like the world around you has started whispering in new ways through random conversations, surprising invitations, or the simple yet powerful feeling that, "I can't delay this anymore," you're not imagining it. These aren't coincidences. They are alignments. Quiet nudges from the invisible architecture of life itself. Energy is always communicating. The universe doesn't speak in sentences, it moves in vibrations, echoes, mirrored moments. And when your inner frequency begins to shift, life outside of you responds accordingly. The law of resonance reminds us, what we focus on, we amplify. What we tune into, we attract. So when you begin to open to clarity, to courage, to readiness, the outer world will send confirmations, sometimes subtle, sometimes bold, but always purposeful. This is why, over these 3 days, you may notice certain messages, signs, or encounters that hit you a little deeper. That feel familiar and new at the same time. That seem to answer questions you haven't even voiced aloud. But this moment is not just about receiving signs, it's about recognizing readiness. Not the kind of readiness where everything is planned and perfect, but the quiet knowing that the delay has become heavier than the risk. And that's where growth begins. There's a powerful teaching that says the moment you truly decide, the path begins to move. It doesn't unfold all at once. It meets you step by step, but only after the inner commitment has been made. In these days, you may also find yourself called to look inward in a more conscious way. Meditation may feel deeper. Silence may feel less empty and more alive. The color deep violet holds energy that supports this kind of stillness. It enhances your connection to insight and helps cleanse what's clouding your view. Wear it or visualize it as a cloak around you when you sit with your thoughts. It supports your return to clarity. Gold, in its luminous warmth, doesn't just symbolize prosperity, it awakens memory. The memory of your worth, your capability, your spark. It's not just about believing in yourself, it's about remembering who you've always been underneath the doubt. Let gold guide your energy as you step into decisions that require confidence, especially when fear tries to convince you to shrink. And then there is moss green, the color of gentle renewal. Not the flashy transformation of dramatic change, but the quiet kind that begins when you decide to forgive what hurt you, release what weighed you down, and give yourself permission to begin again. This hue supports the heart's healing, especially when you're moving through old grief or stories that are ready to dissolve. What's beautiful about this energetic window is that it does not ask for force. It only asks for awareness. If you're willing to stay present, to listen with more than just your ears, to trust that your inner nudge has meaning, then you will begin to see the way forward. Life unfolds from intention. And when your intention is aligned with clarity, compassion, and quiet courage, you naturally walk into what is already waiting for you. Not because it was missing, but because now, finally, you are ready to see it. As the energy begins to reorganize itself around you, Leo, there are 5 distinct areas of life that may feel like they're shifting all at once. This isn't chaos, it's realignment. A reordering of priorities so that what's essential rises, and what's outdated naturally falls away. These shifts don't arrive with flashing lights or loud announcements. They move more like breath, subtle, constant, vital. And if you've been paying attention to your inner landscape lately, you may have noticed the quiet discomfort that comes not from doing something wrong, but from staying in a place too small for who you're becoming. In your career and financial world, the nudge is growing louder. That familiar voice that whispers, "You're meant for more," isn't just ambition. It's recognition. Recognition that you've been undervaluing not just your skills, but your presence. When you say yes to things that drain you, out of fear of being seen as difficult or ungrateful, you dilute your light. But when you begin to ask, even softly, "What is my worth?" you make space for the answer to arrive, not just in thought, but in action. The Queen of Pentacles in Tarot appears here as a guide, not someone chasing wealth, but someone rooted in value. She knows what she brings, and she makes no apologies for claiming space with grace. In love and relationships, there's a deeper reckoning. Are you showing up out of devotion, or out of duty? The two can feel similar but carry very different energy. Devotion nourishes. Duty depletes. When love is true, it expands both people. When it's built on guilt or the fear of disappointing others, it slowly erodes authenticity. Creating boundaries is not a rejection of love, it's what allows love to remain real. It's how connection breathes and evolves. And yes, there may be relationships that resist this clarity. But clarity is not cruelty. It's kindness with direction. Your energy, too, is asking for care. You may be noticing subtle physical symptoms: restlessness at night, headaches that don't have a clear cause, moments of mental fog. These are not failures of the body. They are signals. The body often speaks what the heart has been holding back. Breath work can gently reset your system. Try inhaling deeply, holding for a count, and exhaling longer than you inhaled. It's a practice that mimics the natural rhythm of release. Foods like ginger, turmeric, and mint can support you energetically, warming, cleansing, clearing. Not because they solve everything, but because they remind the body it is being tended to, not ignored. At the level of purpose, something even more tender may be awakening. A quiet knowing that you weren't meant to live on autopilot. That you're not just here to pay bills or be productive. You're here to illuminate, to offer something only you can give. But in order to share your gift, you have to first allow it to rise. Sometimes the most transformative act isn't declaring your purpose loudly, but writing a letter to your future self. Not a goal list, but a truth-telling. A conversation with the version of you who didn't give up. Who lived aligned, even when it was hard. And then, there's the gentle return to family and origin. Not to repeat old roles, but to revisit old stories with new eyes. You may hear from someone from your past, not to pull you back, but to reflect how far you've come. The invitation here is not to reopen wounds, but to soften them. Forgiveness, in its truest form, isn't about excusing anyone. It's about deciding you no longer want to carry the weight. That you are free to walk forward lighter, not because the past disappears, but because it no longer defines you. What's happening now, Leo, is a quiet revolution. One that begins within and echoes outward. You're not being asked to change who you are, only to stop pretending you're anything less than who you've always been. There comes a moment when delay no longer feels like caution, it feels like self-abandonment. And perhaps, Leo, you're beginning to feel that edge now. The friction between who you've been and who you are becoming is no longer subtle. It hums beneath your choices, vibrates in your relationships, shows up in the quietest decisions of your day. The universe doesn't force you, it invites. But this time, the invitation is clearer than ever: live in alignment with what is real, or continue dancing around it. This isn't about urgency in the frantic sense. It's about recognizing the cost of postponing your truth. This phase of your journey asks for a deeper kind of bravery. Not the kind that charges into battle, but the kind that pauses, looks within, and says, it's time. Time to stop negotiating with your intuition. Time to stop editing yourself to stay digestible. Time to stop shrinking so others feel more comfortable. Placing yourself at the center of your own life doesn't mean you love others less. It means you finally understand that love, to be whole, must also include you. You were never meant to orbit other people's expectations. You are meant to be the sun, the very source of your own light. There is a quiet teaching about balance that speaks to this moment. That all suffering arises not from what is, but from resisting what is. When we live in contradiction with our inner knowing, we begin to split. Part of us smiles, shows up, performs. Another part sits quietly behind our eyes, waiting to be acknowledged. And that waiting becomes heavy. Living in alignment isn't about getting everything right, it's about choosing not to betray yourself. Even when it's inconvenient. Especially when it's inconvenient. You may find that the external world continues to pull you in familiar directions. Habits, roles, dynamics where your needs dissolve to keep the peace. But peace built on self-erasure is not peace, it's postponement. Real peace begins when you stop apologizing for your clarity. When you allow yourself to take up space without needing to justify it. And that kind of peace, the one born of truth, creates a ripple. It influences your choices, your presence, your relationships. It calls in a life that doesn't ask you to pretend. If this idea feels overwhelming, start simply. Write down 3 things you're ready to stop doing, not because they're wrong, but because they no longer feel true. Then write down 3 things you want to begin, even if they scare you, even if you don't feel ready. The act of naming these shifts begins a quiet transformation. Like planting seeds in soil that has long been waiting, you don't have to know how they'll bloom. You just have to trust they will. And know this, courage does not mean fearlessness. It means choosing to move forward even while holding fear gently in one hand. Let fear be present, but not in charge. Let doubt exist, but not make your decisions. When you begin to live with honesty, not the sharp kind, but the soft, consistent kind, you become magnetic. Not because you're trying to be anything, but because people recognize truth. And the world is always thirsty for it. You were never meant to fit into a life that required you to dim. You were meant to create a life that reflects your whole being, flawed, radiant, learning, expanding. That begins not with fixing yourself, but by claiming yourself. And now, Leo, the question lingers, not if the universe is ready for you, but if you are ready for you. There's a moment in every journey when stillness becomes a choice, and not a refuge. When staying in the same place no longer feels safe, only stagnant. Leo, you felt the shave in you? That quiet hum beneath the surface of your life, whispering that what once fit now feels too small. It's not that your world is collapsing. It's that you've outgrown the limits you once accepted. And while the heart often craves certainty, growth demands movement. The kind of movement that begins with a single decision, to answer the call instead of waiting for someone else to remind you it's ringing. We often imagine opportunity as something dramatic, a grand opening, a life-changing event, a sign so obvious we can't ignore it. But the truth is, most real opportunities arrive softly. A conversation that lingers longer than it should. A question you can't stop thinking about. A decision you've postponed so many times it starts to ache. These aren't coincidences. They are thresholds. And they will not wait forever. In times like these, the energy around you becomes responsive. It starts to mirror your willingness, or your resistance. If you say yes in your heart, even before you know how, life begins to move with you. But when you hesitate, not the kind of thoughtful pause, but the kind born from fear, you start to notice the silence again. Not peace. Emptiness. Not stillness. Delay. Because at a certain point, not acting is also a choice. And every choice either affirms your light or dims it. The nature of impermanence teaches us that nothing lasts forever. Not discomfort. Not doubt. But also not the invitation that is being offered to you right now. If you wait too long, the timing will shift. The people meant to walk beside you may turn a corner. The window you were meant to walk through may begin to close. Not as punishment, but as natural law. Just as a flower blooms only when the conditions are right, your life unfolds in cycles. And some doors don't stay open indefinitely. That's why the courage to act is sacred. Not because you have to know everything in advance, but because movement itself is a kind of faith. The kind that says, even if I don't have all the answers, I trust that the path will meet me as I step forward. This is not about rushing. It's about refusing to shrink back into the version of yourself you already know you've outgrown. The one who was more comfortable doubting than risking. The one who waited for validation instead of offering it to yourself. So today, if something inside you stirs as you listen, if your breath catches or your chest tightens, not in fear, but in recognition, let that be your sign. Let it be your permission. Write it down. Speak it aloud. Or better yet, anchor it right now by commenting, I choose to live in my honest light. There is power in claiming what you're ready for. And if you feel called to do so, share the name of the city or town you're watching from. Not as trivia, but as a declaration. A light has just been lit where you are. And somewhere, someone else, another Leo, another seeker will feel less alone knowing you're out there too. That's how energy moves. That's how it expands. Through choices. Through presence. Through you. And so, Leo, we've arrived at the end of this message, but not the end of your transformation. If anything, this is just the beginning. The beginning of a deeper conversation between you and your soul. The beginning of no longer waiting for permission to live fully. The beginning of becoming the version of yourself you've always sensed in the quiet moments, braver, brighter, bolder in truth. You were not born to shrink. You were not placed on this earth to blend in or perform. You were meant to rise, to radiate, and to lead from the heart. Everything you've heard today, every word that stirred something in you, is not an accident. These words found you because a part of you was ready to release the weight, ready to rewrite the narrative, ready to rise from the patterns you've outgrown. But knowing alone is not enough. Change only happens when knowing becomes doing. So I ask you now, what is one action you will take, just one that brings you closer to the life that's been calling your name? You've been given so many invitations throughout this message, to honor your worth, to draw boundaries with love, to breathe with intention, to recognize when you're dimming your own light just to stay small. But now comes the real moment, the part where you take what you've received and decide what you will do with it. Will you return to your old rhythms and convince yourself that, maybe later, is good enough? Or will you choose this moment right now to honor your alignment and say, yes, I am ready? Let that, yes, be more than just a thought. Speak it into the world. Type it into the comments. Say it to yourself in the mirror. Breathe it into your decisions this week. Because action, no matter how small, is the bridge between wishing and becoming. And you don't need to have everything figured out. You only need to begin. So tell me, what part of today's message spoke to your heart the most? Was it the reminder of your worth? The call to rise in your career or your relationships? The courage to forgive and release the past? Or was it something quiet, something only you can name? Share it in the comments, not just for me, but for the Leo who reads it and realizes they're not alone. And if this message lit a spark in you, if you felt seen, held, and inspired at any point today, I invite you to take one more step. Like this video. Share it with another heart that might be searching. And if you haven't already, subscribe to Eternal Mindfulness and tap the bell so you never miss another message meant for you. Because I promise you what's coming next is even more aligned, even more powerful, and exactly what your soul has been preparing for. Thank you, truly, for spending this time with me. Your presence here matters. Your energy is felt. And your willingness to grow is what gives this channel life. I'm so deeply grateful to walk this path with you. Remember, Leo, you are not behind. You are not broken. You are not lost. You are being called. And everything you need, you already carry inside you. This journey is yours, but you don't have to walk it alone. So until next time, keep choosing your light. Keep choosing your truth. And above all, keep showing up for the life that's been waiting for you to say yes.